Hi, everybody. It's David Sereda from davidsereda.co. And I haven't done one of these lives, or since before the holidays. So I hope everybody had a great rest and a good holiday. And I decided to take on the dark forces today and really going deep into what actually causes it. And we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 4 in the Bible, and you're going to see something you've never seen about the temptation of Jesus when he's tempted by Satan, Lucifer, whatever you want to call this being, and you're going to see something you've never seen before. It's really going to shock you. So the in the news, I mean, when you see this stuff in the news, I mean, I've seen too many of them recently. There was a father in Utah that shot and killed, his wife, her mom, and all their kids. I think there was 5 kids. And then there was another one only a week later, and where the same thing is happening. And it's not just that. It's you can look at the mass shootings in the United States, and you can say, if we get rid of the guns, we'll solve the problem. And of course, that isn't true, because when you look at what happened in Idaho, the guy used a knife and he killed all these people. So we're looking at what actually causes the a voice to enter a person's head, or is it even that? Is it more stress and fear of survival? But when we look at Matthew 4, I mean, you should really go online, go to Bible Gateway and look at Matthew 4, because you're going to see something most people have never thought this through. Okay, so this is the scene where Jesus goes on his 40 days and 40 nights fast, and he doesn't take any food. And I'm reading the New King James Version. I mean, almost all the versions confirm the same thing. And you're going to see, I'm going to walk you through this, and you're going to see something that you probably never noticed before, because we tend to read through these things really, really quickly. And we just think, Jesus is the Son of God, and he's more powerful than the devil. And so therefore it's just a simple little incident, and it's not at all. And in fact, when you study the lives of the saints, like I have, when you read Saint Teresa's Interior Castle, she has to meet Satan 3 times. And of course, one of the greatest things about Satan is he convinced the world he doesn't exist, and he's just a figment of our imagination. But everything in the world is a figment of your imagination. If you can really see it. Somebody imagined a car, a light bulb, train, pencil. I mean, there's hardly anything here other than the natural world that isn't a figment of somebody's imagination. So when we imagine things, they become real. They become very powerful. And the power of fear is so enormous that the church has had over the subjects, that if they said to you, if you don't believe this, you'll go to hell. Believe me, that's powerful stuff. That's enough to make everybody obey, or at least a lot of the people obey. And then the people who rebel that can really stand out in the crowd. And so when you see people committing these crimes, I mean, one of the things I've noticed in a lot of the shooting spree crimes is you'll see a lone male, usually, who doesn't have a girlfriend. Nobody loves them. And that's very, very common. That's one of the things I don't think anybody's noticing, is these are unloved loners, people that nobody loves. And there's really something to that. Again, you think if you get rid of the guns, you're going to get rid of the violence. But then when you look at Matthew chapter 4 with me, and you realize this consciousness, this being, you can call it the devil, you can call it the dark side of the force, Darth Vader, whatever you want. If it gets in your mind, it's real. Remember, whatever we believe becomes real. You believe in Santa Claus? I mean, Santa Claus comes from the story of the wise men who came and gave presents to the family of Jesus Christ. That's where it starts. So that's not an imagination. It becomes mythic when it becomes a tradition and new characters take over the role, and a red and white suit and presence. And but when you create something in your mind and then you draw it with an ink and pen and you tell a story, it becomes mythic. In fact, most of the Bible is mythic. We don't really know exactly the way it happened. I've talked here also about the Gnostic scriptures and how they were removed, and how we only have the major testimony of 1/3 of all the apostles, and the rest of them were thrown out. Imagine a court that would throw out 2/3 of your testimony and present a court case with 2/3 of the evidence omitted. So let's look at, when you look at what's happening in the world today and this increase of violence, again, you don't see a guy who's got a great, girlfriend or wife who loves them going out shooting people like Bonnie and Clyde. It's not like that. There's so many people in our world who are unloved today. You have to go deeper into that phenomenon to understand what's really going on out there. Why is it that there's so many people who are left out in the cold? And of course, now we polarized everybody with this vaccine. We polarized the entire world with the vaccine. And we also put in, it's kind of like the fear of God in a way, right? So when you look at Satan in Matthew chapter 4, I'm going to read this to you. You're going to see something. Try and figure this out with me, okay? Because I can look at any version. I can look at New King James. I can look at the old Greek versions, and they all pretty much say the same thing. So let's just start. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness and to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, afterwards he was hungry. So just stop right there. Anybody who knows, anybody who's done a 40-day fast, and Jesus in the Shroud of Turin, his imprint is 6 feet tall and a half an inch, which is my height. So if he had a lot of muscle on him as a carpenter, he should be at least 190 pounds. And when he fasts for 40 days, he's going to go down to about 140 pounds. He's going to be incredibly weak physically, right? So continuing in verse 4, now then the tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. But Jesus answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And of course, the word is logos in Greek, which means perfect harmonic vibration. So we live on perfect harmonic vibrations and not just food. Now here's the part that gets hard. Then the devil took him up to the holy city, which would be Jerusalem, and set him on the pinnacle, which means the top of the temple. You know how high that temple is? It's 30 cubits. And if you read Ezekiel, a cubit is a cubit plus a hand, which is a royal cubit, in 5 places. God would never use the common builder's cubit. I mean, I can't believe how many people don't know this. So that means Jesus's feet would be 51.5 feet above the ground, and his head 50, another 6 feet. So, 57.5 feet. That's high. Now, the problem is, it said that the devil set him on top of the temple. Now, what do you mean? Set him on the top of the temple. Try and figure this out. If you know what this temple looks like, the pillars on this, there's no stairs leading to the roof. It's straight up 51.5 feet. There's no way that after a 40-day fast, he's going to be climbing a wall with no steps, no ledges. There's no way for him to get up there. It actually says the devil set him on the top. And then Satan says to him, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down, meaning jump. He's telling him to jump. So first of all, what is Jesus doing up there? He couldn't have climbed up there. In fact, even in those days, I don't know anybody that could climb a straight wall I mean, yeah, these free climbers today, but you're talking about Jesus Christ, who just finished a 40-day fast, and he's up there. It says that Satan set him on top of the temple, and now jump from the temple, for it is written, and this is the part that's interesting, is the devil is quoting Psalm 91. And this is quoting Psalm 91. Why is the devil quoting Psalm 91? Why does the devil read the Bible? Don't you find that a little strange that he's well read? And what he says is, he shall give his angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against the stone, which basically means the angels will levitate you from your feet if you jump. So don't worry, because that's what if you read Psalm 91, let me just go to Psalm 91, because you really have to see this. Psalm 91 says, which is about the safety of abiding in the presence of God. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him I will trust. Surely he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the perilous pestilence, and he shall cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you shall take refuge. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. You shall not be afraid by terror by night, nor of the arrow that flies in the day, nor of the pestilence that walks in the darkness, nor in the destruction that lays waste at noonday. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, it shall not come near you. Only with your eyes shall you look and see the reward of the wicked, because you have made the Lord, who is my refuge, even the Most High, your dwelling place. No evil shall befall you, nor shall any plague come near you, for he shall give his angels charge over you. This is the part that the devil is quoting to Jesus. To keep you in all your ways, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. You shall tread upon the lion and the cobra. The young lion and the serpent you shall trample under your foot. See, this is the kind of stuff, if you saw my talk on Thecla of Iconium, Vibia Perpetua, when they were early Christian martyrs thrown into the amphitheaters to be eaten by lions and snakes, and they tried burning them with fire, nothing would happen to these women. These women were spared. And so there's Jesus, as high up as a bridge, and there's nothing but concrete down below. And obviously, because this is being reported in the Gospel of Matthew, that everyone is seeing this. Everyone is seeing their master deluded, standing on the top of the temple, and it says that Satan put him up there. And it's going to get a lot worse, because now in verse 8, it says again, the devil took him up and put him on an exceedingly high mountain. Now, you have to understand what exceedingly high means. It's not a hill. It's not a mountain, and an exceedingly high mountain, so that he could, and showed him all the kings of the world and their glory, and said, all these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me. So I went on Google Earth and looked, near Jerusalem. And let me show you. Can I do a share screen, Sharoz? I don't know. So if you go to Jerusalem on Google Earth, and I found Mount Hermon, and it's close to 8,000 feet high. And sure enough, I checked on a mathematical calculator. From 8,000 feet up, you could definitely see Jerusalem about 120 miles away.
David, to share screen, you have to click present.
I know the problem is I don't even know where I've clicked on so many links now. I don't even know where my StreamYard is anymore. So I can't even see me. So again, he's the highest mountain. Again, this is exceedingly high. Jesus hasn't eaten in 40 days. So what happened? Did the devil come in his head and Jesus stumbled up an 8,000-foot mountain? And I checked, Jerusalem is pretty close to 2,000 feet high. So Jesus would have to gain, he'd have to travel 120 miles north and go to the top of this mountain. Doesn't make any sense, because it's not like in those days they had, your favorite hiking trails. I mean, I personally climbed Mount Whitney when I was very fit in my younger days, when I was a tree planter, and I beat the posted Army time by 4 hours. And I was so strong. We started at 4 in the morning, and I got up to the top of, it was 14,490 feet. And I got up there, right? So, but I didn't fast for 40 days. And I can tell you that most of the people take 2 days to go to the top of Mount Whitney. Now, it says from the top of this mountain, that this is in verse 8 of Matthew 4, that you could see the kingdoms of the world from there and their glory. So again, who is this devil being to somehow get Jesus to the top of Mount Hermon, or maybe it was Mount Sinai? It doesn't say, the mountain of God. It says an exceedingly high mountain. Exceedingly high, very high would not be a hill. It would not be one of the lowly hills. You wouldn't see all the kingdoms of the world from up there. And to say all the kingdoms of the world, let's say, across the Mediterranean, it was, the mountain of the Greek gods, the or it was the Sinai, which is more to the south, which there are different contenders actually for the Mount Sinai. They're not 100% clear if the Sinai we picked is the Sinai, but it doesn't say that. So the only exceedingly high mountain we can find is high enough to see cities, especially at night below. Although it actually says you can see all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. This is incredibly disturbing, because you have to put these scriptures to the test. Is this mythic, or is this actual? And the way Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John read is actual. Other than parables, this is not a parable. There's no way Jesus, after not eating for 40 days, and he won't do anything the devil says. He won't command the stones to become bread. He didn't throw himself off the temple, but he's up there, and it would be a foolish looking sight to see him up on the top of the temple. And then you have to ask yourself, how did he get down and then get himself on top of this huge mountain? You can't just walk down from the top. It actually says Satan put him on the top. Now, this being, see, if you read, I'm rereading Holy Blood and Holy Grail, and you really, Michael Bajan, Henry Lincoln give you this perspective and history of the earliest movements that were the earliest churches. Like, first you had the Orthodox Church in Constantinople, and then you had the Catholic Church. By about 500 AD, the Catholic Church is formed in Rome, and then you had these movements called the Cathars, and you had the Templars, and then you had the Rosicrucians and the Rosicrucians and the Rose Cross, and you had all these movements. And the Templars and the Cathars were immensely powerful, and they did not like the Catholics. Might have had fragments of what we call the Gnostic Gospels today that were discovered in 1945, because we know in the Vatican Library they were hiding a great wealth of secrets. But we would have to say that what we do know is there were mythic, godlike, powerful entities from the ancient world that had very long physical lifespans that could go into the many hundreds of years, like Methuselah and Enoch and many others. So for this devil character to have the ability to put Jesus on the top of an 8,000 foot mountain, or even on top of the temple, and bring him down, he would have to have some form of aerial transport. And you could kind of play with your imagination on how the devil set him, it says, on the top of the temple, and then got him back down. I don't know how you do that, because that's high. That's really high. I've jumped 115 feet off a cliff into a waterfall before, but not, there's no water down there for Jesus to jump into. He's not on the edge of the sea. So he can't jump, and he's very weak physically. So how did he get him back down? You really got to think this through. This is not easy to figure out. It doesn't say anything about ladders going up 50 feet. And if he used a ladder, it says that the devil set Jesus on the pinnacle of the temple, like some type of toy. Like, how do you grab him by the scruff of the neck at 140 pounds? And was he a giant, this being? Is he so powerful that he can do that? Is he some type of massive muscular remnant of, like King Kesekamui, apparently in Egypt, was 8 feet tall. So can you imagine Shaquille O'Neal picking up Jesus at 140 pounds and throwing him on his back and dragging him up an 8,000? You gotta play this through your head, because you got to come to an answer that makes sense. You can't. It says, and again, the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain. How do you do that? He's not eaten. And I imagine Jesus was very, very strong as a builder, as a carpenter, being 6 feet tall. And even if he wasn't 6 feet tall, but the Shroud of Turin shows him at that height. Why is he agreeing to do this, to go to the top of this mountain? And then once again, the devil tells him to fall down and worship him. Now, what does fall down mean? Does it mean throw himself off that mountain too, and that somehow he'll rescue him, as in Psalm 91? Is this character being in Jesus's head, and he's stumbling himself up an 8,000 foot mountain somehow? Did Jesus was he a master climber, and he could climb a wall, the outside of the temple, Solomon's temple, 30 cubits, and get to the top? I don't know the answer, but I can tell you, if you're really honest with yourself and you try to figure this out, this being is some type of a demigod who has a vehicle, a spaceship, or a flying saucer. I don't know what he had to get Jesus on, to set him on top of the temple and pick him up and take him down and then put him on the top of a huge mountain. Because, unless you've got a helicopter, you can see there's depictions in the temple in Egypt. I'm trying to remember the name of the temple, where we can see the carvings of what looks like a helicopter. It maybe if anybody had anything that flew back then, and they were extreme, and it says here, if he falls down and worships the devil, he'll give him the whole world, right? So that whoever this being is, he's the king of the world. And the Cathars, which are very early Christian movement extremists, I would call them extremists, who wanted to take matters into their own hands and not believe the Catholic Church's autonomy over this religion, that they had enormous amounts of money, the Cathars. But again, this is way after the time of Jesus. And then the Templars had enormous wealth. Was there a type of technology that, in fact, we have, if you read the Kebra Nagast, which is, I have it around here somewhere, the Ethiopian Book of Kings says the Ark of the Covenant actually levitated the Israelites' luggage and all their belongings and their journey to find the new land. So the Ark of the Covenant, which is inside the temple at this time, I presume, because it's inside the Holy of Holies, which is 20 by 20 cubits, which is a cube. And beyond the Holy of Holies is the holy place, which is 10 by 20 cubits. And the height of the temple was 30 cubits above that. So that's where he's standing. He's standing up there. I mean, it says the holy city. That has to be Jerusalem, right? It can't. There is no other temple we know of in the region. Yes, there were smaller temples all over, but it says he took him up into the holy city. So the holy city is Jerusalem because that's where the temple is. So it has to be Jerusalem. I don't know ultimately how the devil got him on top of the temple, but you can't ignore the question. If you know what Solomon's temple looks like, there's no way to get up there. It's like those giant Greek columns, the pillars. How is he going to climb those and get up there and then get himself back down without falling? And why is the devil quoting Psalm 91? Why would the devil read the Bible? It doesn't really kind of make a lot of sense. So who is this being who now the Cathars called what they believed was that the king of the world, who was known as Rex Mundi, the king of the world, Mundi meaning the world, was an inferior god, not unlike what's written in the secret gospel of John in the Gnostic scripture. Yaltabaoth, who goes by many other names, tells everybody he's God. He's very, very powerful, but he's not really God, but he wants to believe he is. You might think this is the same character here. And this being is very powerful in the world, as the Cathars said that Rex Mundi really is the king of the world. And it's indisputable that when you're in this world, what the devil is saying here is, I control the whole world. I'm the king of the world, which the knowledge was passed on to the Templars. And the Templars are massacred, I forget the year, because I don't have my book in front of me, by order of the Pope. I don't know how, because they had enormous armies. They were all killed on an October the 13th. And going forward to 1917, October the 13th was the miracle of the sun at Fatima, Portugal. And again, if you look at the miracle of the sun at Fatima in Portugal, which is the same date, October 13th, it's actually my brother's birthday. And again, there's no way that the sun did that. It's something that was in front of the sun, between the sun and the observers, and probably some type of flying vehicle. Now, if you read Ezekiel, you will see in the book of Ezekiel the wheels within the wheels. You'll see the description of a spacecraft, and God is sitting on this throne made of sapphire in the book of Ezekiel. So we know that there are flying vehicles. Now, that Ezekiel should tell us that there are flying vehicles, because it does. And if you look at the size of the stones in these temples, you'll see that somebody had an ability to levitate stones. So did this dark being have the ability to levitate Jesus's body and set it on the temple, and not even use a spaceship, and levitate him and put him on the top of an exceedingly high mountain, including himself? Or did he transport him there? Again, nobody's ever asked this question, and it has to be answered. So then what happens when Jesus, doesn't do anything the devil tells him? Jesus says, away with you, Satan. And you realize that he's now administered by angels. So angels come down and minister to him. How? Is this in a visionary state? Is it a physical, actual state? Did they come down in flying vehicles? And now that Jesus has withstood this test of this dark being who claims to control the entire world, he starts casting out demons and healing people. This is when the beginning of the healings, and it includes epileptics, paralytics, demon possessed, people who are tormented in their minds. And that's where his ministry begins. So he overcomes it. The devil doesn't, massacre his body yet, but eventually, of course, they massacre his body and crucify him, and then he resurrects himself, proving that he cannot be killed. So in a way, when I watch what's going on in the news and I watch these massive amounts of shootings in America, and I wonder what's going on in the inside of these people. Does a father kill his 5 kids, his wife, and her mom in Utah because of Biden's new IRS agents, and he's worried they're going to come and take the house and throw them on the street? That could be. The same. There was another case that happened, like I said, only a week later, where another dad did the same thing, and you hear stories of, like, is it a father trying to protect his family, or is it something more like this, where the Bible tells us that Satan only has a little bit of time left, and he gets inside of people's minds and is causing them to shoot people in mass numbers? Or is it more that when people are pushed to their limit, they just break down? That people, are working harder and harder. They're working 2 and 3 jobs just to survive. When I was a kid, my stepfather, when my mom remarried, had a job, and my mom sewed dresses and raised 4 boys. I mean, in those days, only one person in the family had to work, and there was enough money for everybody. And it was the same when my mom was married to my real dad. He was assistant professor of psychology at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, and there was enough food and shelter for all of us. I mean, is it the fear? Is it the lack of love that causes a lone young man to get a gun and go shoot everybody? I mean, it's getting so commonplace in American culture. You can't just think that politically you can create some law to take away everybody's guns and there's not going to be any more violence, because we know, like I said, there's many cases of people using other weapons, even homemade, munitions. So when this is happening to people, is it stress? Is it loneliness? Is it a broken heart? Is it a broken country? Or is it turning our backs on God because the church itself has the devil masquerading around inside of it and is abusing our children? How many people have lost faith in God because of the crimes that the church is committing? And the abuse of the First Nations children in the residential schools has come out, and that same abuse exists in the Catholic schools. I mean, there's reports in Ireland of the Catholics killing 9,000 children, and the remains of those children were discovered, and those aren't First Nations children. They did it to their own kids. So this dark force is immensely powerful, is what I'm saying. And I believe when we don't give our love, and you see a person who's unloved, you're seeing the beginning of how that person eventually breaks down, and they come apart at the seams. And there's more and more of it, and there's more of it, and there's more of it, and there's more of it. And the Democrats think if you get rid of the guns, they've been thinking this forever, then everything will be peaceful again. And I just don't think they're going deep enough. So I wanted to put this story of Matthew 4, in everybody's minds, because it really rings. There's a truth here. There's a mythic truth here, that even the Son of God can be so weak in his weakest moment that he puts himself in this position where the most evil being of all has got him and put him on the top of a temple, whether he used a spaceship or some levitation beam. I mean, we have so many stories today. And of course, it's in the mainstream media now. I don't know how anybody can ignore it. And there's this new film called Missing 411, where these hunters and witnesses see these UFOs levitate an elk, in a levitation beam and carry them away. I mean, our bones are calcium, and calcium is paramagnetic. It's a paramagnetic metal in a magnetic beam. You can levitate that.
Prime, David? Is that movie on
Oh,
Prime?
Missing 411 is everywhere now. It's you buy it. It's not something that's on Prime. No, you have to pay to watch it. Right. It's actually #1 on iTunes documentaries. And I've seen it. And when you understand that in these stories in modern day, we can see if you can levitate a cow and you can levitate an elk, then this being could put Jesus in a levitating beam and put him on top of the temple and put him on top of an 8,000-foot mountain. But obviously, there's also Jesus was alone when he did his 40-day fast in the wilderness, and there's other scripture that's written that has really good descriptions of what he kind of went through in that journey. So he gets baptized by John the Baptist. The Holy Spirit appears, saying, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." John admonishes himself really and saying that Jesus is far greater than he's not even worthy to walk in his shoes. But then Jesus retreats and he goes into the wilderness on his 40-day fast. And this is what happens when he's at the end of his 40-day fast. So somehow this being got him alone in the wilderness, kind of like the way these elk hunters in Missing 411 are captured when they're alone in the wilderness. And, the first case is actually in British Columbia in the movie. But once you understand that, I mean, I believe, looking at this logically, there's no way Jesus hiked up an 8,000-foot mountain, with the devil right beside him. Yeah, sure, I'll hike with you. Let's go on a long hike together and go camping. Like, no, I don't buy that. Why would he do that? And I mean, he'd have to be incredibly weak to do that, or incredibly confident, knowing that there's no way this evil being is going to convince him to do anything. But, it says it was set on the pinnacle of the temple. It doesn't say convince Jesus to climb to the top of the temple. No, it says it set him on the temple. So you've got to take this word for word. And there's no way to do that to a 6-foot tall man. You can't just drag him by the scruff of the neck and set him on top of the temple unless you're 8 feet tall and you've got freaking arms like this, right? Like, I'd have a hard time carrying my youngest daughter, Astaria, to the top of a 50-foot temple. I don't think I could do that. And what if you drop them, and you're dragging them up there and you're trying to get your way up there? It really doesn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, with that, I'm on Coast to Coast AM tonight with George Norrie. It'll be a pleasure to be on his show again. It's been a while since I was there. I used to do that show and Art Bell in my early days on a regular basis as a recurring guest. If anybody has any questions, Rose, I can't actually see them. I don't know why I can't see my. The
only question, really, it isn't really a question. It's Charles basically saying that it's a horrible interpretation.
Why is it a horrible interpretation? Because we're reading scripture. Unless you have a better answer, but you can't have an answer that is not written.
Good Lord, is Dave serious? This interpretation is ludicrous, is what he said.
So why is it ludicrous? Tell me why it's ludicrous. Oh, hang on, you guys. I gotta. Hello. Yeah, I sent you a new list. Yep, with even more. I sent you 2. So yeah. I mean, see, the real story isn't. It isn't. It starts with Tesla and Edison, but it goes. The real story is how the monument is transmitting this frequency, and all of a sudden all the greatest inventions of the world appear within a 200 nautical mile bubble around the monument, and it's for in perpetuity from that moment forward. But Edison's inventions, and we can go over them, they're very basic, right? Phonograph, the direct current, and the earliest light bulbs, the battle of the currents. That's pretty basic stuff, but that's not, I don't want to get stuck there. Look at the second one that I sent you, and there's a lot there. There's over 20 points now. Okay. Thank you. Okay. That was just so when I love the. Are you still there?
Yeah.
I love the process of debate. I love the process of debate, but what I don't like is if you make a statement ludicrous, back yourself up. Yeah, how can you answer what the scripture says? What's the solution? Because if you read this the way it's written, you have to have an answer. This being claims to have the total autonomy and power over the entire world. So
Nance Hardwick is saying, could Jesus and Satan be in spirit?
It doesn't say that. This is a physical moment in his life. See, if you say, could they be in spirit, it would say in the spirit, like 2 Corinthians says, in the spirit. Like, you can't, when you're looking at scripture, I can't say it's a flying saucer, but if I play the game of logic, because you have to be logical, then you have to find out how he got him on top of a 51-foot temple with perfectly straight pillars that really nobody could climb unless you have a ladder. But it doesn't say that Jesus and Satan climbed to the top of the temple. It says Satan put him on top of the temple. So you got to read it. And then you got to say, okay, how did he put him up there? Right? So that's all I'm saying. And it's a lot. You have to read Ezekiel. Read Ezekiel. Maybe you haven't read Ezekiel, that there's an actual craft that it had wheels within wheels and a sapphire throne with the Ancient of Days sitting on the sapphire throne, shining like the sun. Okay, so that's in your Bible. You can't say that that's not there. So you can't say that those technologies don't exist because you don't want to believe it. You can't omit that because you say you don't want to believe it. So what makes it's not a theory, it's written in Matthew 4. How did Jesus get to the top of an exceedingly high mountain after not eating for 40 days? And with this being taking him up there.
Lund Williams says Satan had control of his matrix.
Still does. Because if Satan had control of the world in those days, we haven't seen the transformation yet. So you can't say that he doesn't have control of the world today. And yet, at the same time, you have to wonder what made him so powerful that he could put Jesus on top of the temple. This isn't a toy. This isn't a toy temple. It's dangerously high, 30 cubits, and those are a cubit of God is in Ezekiel. It's a cubit plus a hand. That's your long cubit. So what's he doing up there? And how did he get down? Try and figure it out. And if you come up with an answer, if there's an expert in scripture who knows, Jesus's temptation in the canonized scripture doesn't have a lot more. There's not a lot more to say here, but you can't just skip by this and say, oh, it doesn't matter. He got him up there. He set him up there. What do you mean? Okay, let's go. I can go to my Catholic church in my town. I can't get up on the top of that roof. Not without a really high ladder, and that would be pretty scary. And our temple isn't that high. No, it's not 30 cubits. It might be 35 feet, but 51 feet. No, that's, I mean, ladders get really unstable at that height. And again, it doesn't say there was a ladder, right? It doesn't say that. So all I'm saying is this, whoever this being was, and if you don't believe this being exists, then how do you explain the consciousness of violence in our world today and the explosion in the mass numbers of people who are participating in these mass shootings? How do you explain it? Where does the thought come from to begin with that causes a person to do this and execute it? I mean, it's America last year had over 200 mass shootings. Over 200. Why? Why is it happening? If you say, I mean, are you saying you don't believe this being
I don't
exists?
understand what this statement here is. It kind of does if you understand how important it is to health that you eat the sacred bull. I don't know what that means.
Well, it's interesting because the bulls, if you go back to the early temples, you'll see the bulls. If you go to the the Mormon temple, they have I think, I forget how many bulls surround the baptismal font. They have the bulls. But I don't know what the person's saying. I mean, it's kind of vague. So
I don't know if he's trying to say if we eat meat or a different type of meat or something, we'd be stronger. I don't know, but he was fasting for 40 days, so we've already covered that.
Well, we know that Jesus was a Jew who ate meat and ate fish. Yes, the early Cathars had observance periods of vegetarianism and they ate fish, but the idea of vegetarianism is really something that comes from India. It doesn't exist in the Middle East on its own. It's not. When Jesus was asked, what should we eat in the Gospel of Thomas, he says, don't eat what you don't like. And they even asked him if they should fast, right? Should they do his? Many of the saints actually did the 40-day fast of Assisi did, and some of them took it to real extremes, right? They really took it to extremes. They did it too many times, and then they died very, very young. I still can't find my page, Rose.
Huh.
You there?
I don't know, David.
I don't know where. We're not using Zoom, right? So
it should be in your browser.
Got a million windows.
Wherever.
Open. Anyway, if there's no more questions, people can. Of course, we live in the world. You can believe whatever you want. You can believe that this piece of scripture is mythic. It is not even real. That there's people who don't believe that Jesus ever existed today. They do. You believe whatever you want. I mean, I'm not going to fight anybody. I'm really interested in how this is happening in our culture. The extreme violence, the extreme amount of people. Like here it is. This was on NBC News. Man kills his wife and 3 children in North Carolina. Murder-suicide. This was January the 9th. Yesterday. And before that was the man who killed his wife and children in Utah. Right. And of course, they don't all make paper. I mean, these things are going on. And I'm just interested in, why is it all of a sudden happening?
This guy is just saying how his view of plant eating is not. God said, don't eat the forbidden fruit. Fruit, see a plant, a toxic plant. The Idaho killer is a vegan. Toxic plants. Plants are toxic.
Oh, the Idaho killer was a vegan?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. I don't know how anybody found that out.
Yeah, how would they know? That's the other thing.
Well, there's things all over the internet nowadays, so I still have to be able to find out where my my link is. I mean, why do we have an atomic bomb? Like, why is it even possible to play the game of intimidating the entire world with an atomic bomb?
I'm glad you're bringing this to people's attention. There's much more to this than meets the eye. I know the being that you are talking about. What if it is actually the God of justice, the God of the Old Testament, Lord of hosts? I don't know what that means either.
Well, remember Jesus and I think it's John 8:44 is arguing with a group of Jews, because there's two gods in the Old Testament. There's a God of war, who Jesus calls a murderer and a liar, and then there's the real God.
Right. That's what he's saying. Okay.
Yeah. So there's two, and it's similar, because the Cathars and the Templars believe this Rex Mundi. It's really one and the same. It's the God of the world, and that's why I'm saying, in this particular scene, why is he quoting Psalm 91? He's well read, and he's trying to convince Jesus to jump, right? He's trying to convince him to jump. And of course, Jesus isn't going to jump. But then I could ask you, how many people did jump? How many people jumped?
The thing is, if anyone's going to claim he levitated up there, then he could levitate himself down too, right?
No, but it doesn't say Jesus levitated. It says Satan put him
up there. Yeah.
Put him up there. So that's not Jesus being in control either, is it?
Right.
That's showing that's showing who's in control of the situation. It's Jesus is weak. He just fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. And he's not in control. And it says Satan also, finally I found the link.
The name Vinayaka is a common name for Ganesha, both in the Puranas and in Buddhist Tantras. The Vinayakas were a group of 4 troublesome demons who created obstacles and difficulties. They at first were thought to be detrimental, then realized to be beneficial as part of the divine orchestration. The word daemon is synonymous to daemon, deity, or knowing or wise. The name Ganesha derives from the Sanskrit words Gana, meaning a group, and Isha, meaning Lord or Master.
Well, I'm sure. See, there's a lesson in all of it. I'm sure. Maybe Jesus went along for the ride because it was part of the divine play, right? What Dante calls the divine.
That too, right?
The divine comedy. I mean, there's a lesson. You hear this voice in your head, don't listen to it. Len Williams says Jesus was able to walk on water. You're right, except that it doesn't say Jesus put himself on the temple. It says Satan put Jesus on the temple, on the pinnacle, meaning the top. So Richard, it's not that God, what Jesus told me in person is in the Garden of Eden, God didn't want us to partake in the knowledge that causes you to judge good and evil. It's not, it's a differential consciousness. As soon as two people try to decide on good and evil for themselves, they're going to disagree with each other and they're going to start fighting. Right? Now, what if you had differential consciousness and you just saw that the other person is seeing something different than you, and you don't think you're right and they're wrong, right? It's not the differential that causes the problem. It's the ego that thinks my judgment is correct and yours is not correct. And so God was warning Adam and Eve not to take in the knowledge of good and evil because it's mythic. If you take in the judgment yourself, just like Jesus said, not to judge, and you judge people, how does it feel to be judged by somebody else? For them to say you don't fit in, or you're wrong and I'm right. Let's have a fight. And I mean, it's kind of interesting because you look now at Prince Harry and his brother fighting. It kind of reminds me of Cain and Abel's fight, right? Because one person thinks they're right and the other one's wrong. So that's what God is saying. For peace, there's no judgment. And when there's no judgment, there's no violence. And there's no violence, there's no violent act. Nobody's killing anybody. You can't have a violent act until first you have a conflict. And a conflict is when one person thinks their judgment is better than the others. So God said, don't take in the knowledge of good and evil upon yourself, or you'll die. There's a warning. You'll kill each other because you'll think you're right and the other person's wrong. It's a trick. It's a mind trick. See, there's no good and evil until there's judgment. And if there's love, there's no judgment. Right? And because you love each other. You're brothers, right? Cain and Abel were brothers. But when one of them thinks they're right and the other one's wrong, and they both think that way, then they're hitting each other with sticks, and eventually one of them's dead. So that's the way Jesus explained it to me in person. It's a mind trick. If thine eye be single, means you're no longer in duality, you're no longer in conflict. Your whole body will be filled with light. The illumination happens when the judgment ends. And so no, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the originals are not in Aramaic. They're in Greek. And that's disturbing enough because Jesus never preached in Greece. He didn't speak Greece. The language of the Roman Empire was Latin. Jesus spoke Aramaic. He probably knew some Latin. To survive inside of the Roman Empire, you would have to know some Latin at least. But Jesus spoke Aramaic, which is early Hebrew. There are many different, just like if you go to France today and then you go to Montreal, Canada, they don't understand each other and they're both speaking French. And the early Hebrew languages, they didn't all understand each other. And it was the same in Gaul, which is now, the United Kingdom. There were hundreds of Celtic languages. And they did not understand each other, and they were fighting all the time. There were tons of wars. Again, wars are the expression of the human ego, where one group thinks they're superior to the other, right? So when the atomic bomb was first created, it was really started by Einstein when he wrote his famous letter to Roosevelt urging the fission of uranium. But then an American effort was undertook, and Alfred O.C. Neer in the Northeast University discovered the fissionable uranium, which led ultimately to the discovery of the explosive uranium isotopes in the atomic bomb. And then the Russians used a spy in Los Alamos. They stole the bomb. They detonated the bomb. And then the Americans, because the Russians had the bomb, they put missiles in Turkey pointing at Russia and missiles in Europe pointing at Russia. Then the Russians didn't like that. And then they sent their missiles to Cuba, and you started the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because of stolen technology, and also because the power that technology represented. And then the Americans Edward Teller invented the hydrogen bomb, and the same thief who was an insider stole the H bomb. The Russians got it. They made a bigger H bomb. And then Kennedy, very peacefully disarmed the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they signed a test ban treaty after the Russians tested the stolen hydrogen bomb. And they made a bigger one. Of course, they made a bigger one. And so the whole, that's the duality. See, the very fact that the atom contains the power to destroy everything, I call it Adam's atom. It's duality. It's the dual forces. If you split the atom I worked with nuclear physicists and particle physicists and nuclear fusion physicists for 20 years. I was on the very inside. I got to meet Glenn Seaborg, who chaired the Atomic Energy Commission under Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, and sit there in the Lawrence Berkeley lab and tell him about my UFO sighting with his assistant, Albert Ghiorso, who's even more brilliant than he is. And these guys were the head of the whole nuclear program. Seaborg won the Nobel Prize for the discovery with Macmillan of the explosive uranium isotope that was the final one that led to the atomic bomb. Now, why? Again, you detonate the atomic bomb as a form of revenge for Pearl Harbor, ultimately ends the war. In fact, it ended all the big wars, stopped when the bomb was invented. But then the Russians steal it. Then the Chinese get it. Now everybody's got the bomb, so we can all scare the crap out of each other. So it's the same thing. If you go back to Matthew 4, it's the same thing. This being controls the world. How do you control the world? You have to have the biggest army to control the world. You have to have the most powerful weapon to control the world. So who is the being that put Jesus on top of the temple, on top of the mountain? We have evidence of nuclear weapons being used thousands of years ago because we can see the residue underneath ancient cities in the soil from the fallout of those weapons being used. These things have been around forever. So that being might have been a remnant, super earthly type God who had an enormously powerful status and technology. And it wouldn't be unheard of to have some type of flying vehicle to put Jesus on top of a mountain in a temple. I don't know what it was. All I can tell you is it doesn't make sense that he climbed the temple and he walked up an 8,000-foot mountain after fasting for 40 days. There's something missing in the story. And when there's something missing in a story, it becomes mythic. And that's why I look at Ezekiel and I look at the spaceship in Ezekiel and I say, put two and two together. So Richard's saying, that's interesting. My dad was U.S. Air Force and was involved in managing nuclear weapons. I grew up where we made the warheads. My great uncle came to the U.S. 100 years ago and joined the War Department and then involved in the creation of the U.S. Air Force. Just saying. Yeah, see that after Roswell, the CIA was formed in 1947, only months after the Roswell incident. But there's very strange things about the Roswell incident because you tested Trinity, first atomic bomb, I think it was July 22nd, 1945. And then the Roswell incident involves the crash of 3 different crash sites of flying saucers all around the Trinity site. In the same month, but 2 years later, 1947, July 1947. And it's hard to get the exact date of those crashes. Now let's go forward, because I'm going to be talking about this tonight with George Norrie. When you get to the Washington, D.C. incident in 1952, it was also July when all these UFOs swarm the Capitol, the White House, and the Monument. And they did it twice. It's July. And guess what happened 3 months later? The first hydrogen bomb was tested. November 1st. It was early November 1952. So only months later. So again, why do you have these UFO sightings in and around the human testing of the atomic weapons, both the atomic bomb and the H-bomb. The H-bomb is much more powerful, and the fallout and the residual radiation lasts for potentially less time. I mean, it's a complicated weapon. So that means that are the UFOs remnants of an earlier civilization, or a civilization that actually controls the planet, hence as in Jesus being put on the top of the mountain in the temple, and that they're merely watchers. They're watching us. They don't get involved very often, but when we make something nuclear, they do get involved, because maybe they have bases up at our mountains somewhere, right? Yeah, the Anunnaki, absolutely. I've read all of that stuff. I'm just reading some of these notes. Anyway, you guys, so I'm talking about this from a perspective that, I mean, I had my visions of Christ, over 5 of them, shining brighter than the sun. I've met a lot of the meditation master teachers from the Far East. There's nobody that compares to him that I've ever met. It's indescribable what it's like to be in his presence in a visionary state. It's I can't prove it to anybody, but I can prove it to myself, right? So if I say I met Jesus Christ, and if I'm lying, may I be struck down by lightning right now. And I proved it to myself. I put it to the test. You don't have to believe me. Absolutely not. Put it to the test yourself. Find out if it's true. I've met the Dalai Lama in India. I can tell you, meeting Jesus, at least in the visionary state, is beyond every being I've ever met anywhere on this earth. So it's a very easy decision for me who my master is. But I don't think we have all the answers. I don't think the Bible, as it's written, and especially removing 2/3 of the apostles' testimony, which we've now recovered. In fact, at the time of the Templars and the Cathars, they didn't have access to the Gnostic scriptures. And the Gospel of Philip, it's very clear in the Gospel of Philip why it had to be removed, because it's very clear that Mary Magdalene is no prostitute. She's from a very wealthy family, and she's the bride of Christ. And that's what all the references to the bride are. The bride is not the church. It's a feminine word. Bride is feminine. It's not about a building. It all got morphed and changed, and again became mythic because they removed the Gospel of Philip. Now, if the Gospel of Philip was around at the time of St. Francis, I believe he would have married Sister Clare because he was in love with her. He's very clear that Francis was in love with Sister Clare. It's one of the and Dante was in love with Beatrice. I mean, but when you remove such important testimony, then it becomes mythic when fragments of it emerge, and then you start to see that we don't know the whole story here at all. That there's so much we don't understand, and why are we so afraid to change our view? Doesn't it make sense, with all the molestation of all the children by all the priests, that in the churches where the priests could marry, you have very, very little of these sexual abuse problems and social problems? That if Jesus was married and priests could marry and be divine and all the same, the problem would be solved. So why don't they reform the church? Because the Vatican's sitting on this knowledge that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene. But why are people so afraid to believe that? Oh my God, you could go to hell. Oh my God, I can't believe that David Sereda believes that. He's going to go to hell for sure. So, see what I mean? That's how powerful this being is. It's so powerful that it puts fear in people, that even though there's scriptural evidence that has emerged from the sands that prove that Jesus, his bride, was a woman, and that the priests should be able to marry just like they do in the Orthodox Church, where they have very little of these problems, Why are people so afraid to change their belief structure? Because somebody told them, you believe that, you're going to hell. That's how powerful this being is. This being is a consciousness of fear. This fear gets in you. Oh my God, you're going to burn if you believe that. But then yet it's okay for these priests to keep molesting our children. That's okay for you as a believer. But it's not okay if your priests are married like they are in the Orthodox Church. Maybe the Orthodox Church knows this and they're hiding it, because when you read The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, the very book that inspired Dan Brown to write his mythic series, very clear that the Cathars and the Templars knew that Jesus had a wife and he had a blood one. He had children. Every prophet in the Bible, pretty much that we know of, we can identify that they had children and they had wives, and that there were female prophets as well.
Why would they single out this one prophet? Why?
Well, see,
and
Jesus
deny
said
him a wife. Why would they deny?
Well, Jesus said all prophecy ended with John, and John precedes Jesus. So he's saying he's not a prophet. He's saying he's the Son of God. But it doesn't matter. The church, if you really know your history of the church, that the Roman Empire was collapsing and the Christians were burned. The Christians burned Rome to the ground under Nero. 75, 70 AD, they were burning the Roman landscape. The Roman Empire was falling. They had to get their people back. And they were all adhering to Christianity, so they took Christianity. The Roman Empire was led by men. There were no female rulers. But the last pharaoh of Egypt was Cleopatra, was a woman. In the old world, women could be rulers. But so very, very clear what they were doing. When they examined the religion, they took control of the religion, they usurped it, they got rid of all the testimony of powerful women, and they made it look like an all-male hierarchy, just like the Roman Empire, and they turned it into a religion, and all the subsequent Christian religions were victims of the control and the autonomy that the Catholic Church had over those scriptures. And I don't care if they think they're different, they're not. Because when the Gnostic Gospels emerged and they were translated at Princeton University, Claremont, all the major universities in America translated the Gnostic Gospels into English, people were still too afraid to believe that women could be that powerful and equal to men. And their priest probably told them, if you believe this, you're going to go to hell because it's heresy, so don't believe it, don't even read it. Even though it was translated at Princeton University. I went to lectures by Elaine Pagels from Princeton University at USC, University of Southern California, met her in person, bought all her books, read them, and then I read all the Gnostic Gospels myself. And I made my own decision. This is all true. It glorifies Christ and his bride and the community even more than the canonized, New Testament. I don't have any problem with any of it. I don't have any problem with a woman being equal to a man in this divinity. It doesn't strip him of his divinity in any way at all. And was Moses stripped of his divinity because he had children and he had a wife when he was younger? And when he got to be an old man, he went into the mountains with his staff and he trained with his staff for 30 years and communicated with God. And his brother Aaron, who was actually older than him, did the same thing. I mean, had his kids when he was younger. Like, why are we so afraid to accept that Jesus had a real bride? Bride is not a term used to bond with a church. There was no church back then. It was called the Way. They were the earliest Christians were preaching across the landscape. There was no building. The Jews had the temple. We know that. We know that Jesus speaks about the importance of the temple in the Gospel of Philip. But nevertheless, see, tonight I'm talking about fear. I'm talking about this being that we call the devil or Satan or whatever you want to call him, is so powerful that if the priest tells you, if you believe Jesus was married to a woman, you will go to hell, they won't believe it. The majority of Christians will never believe this. Of course they won't, because they're afraid they're going to go to hell. That's the devil's job, to make you so afraid that you will obey what they tell you. And those same people are molesting our children by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, because we don't know how many cases never made the courts. And you still believe these people? You still let your kids go in there? Not my kids. We're Christians, but they're not going in there. I'm not leaving them alone in there. No way. No way. But I believe, and perfectly at peace with this, that Jesus was married and he had his children. There's a bloodline. And that's what I believe. And I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. God is not going to judge me. Let's say 50% of the story of all of it that was written in Greek isn't even true. I don't have a problem with that either. But only thing I know for sure is if you meditate and you pray to God. I've done this every day. I spent hours and hours and hours on a daily basis throughout my life in prayer. And when I met Christ in person, all I can tell you is there's nothing that compares to him. There's no other experience that can compare to this. And I wouldn't, putting everybody to the test, I can put all the gurus that were very famous from India that came to the West and how many of them got caught in sex scandals with their students. And people still follow those gurus. So why do they have a problem with the fact that Jesus was married and had kids? I don't know. Maybe it's just because the power of fear is so great. My God, it's so great. The very people that are molesting our children and murdering First Nations children and murdering Catholic children in Ireland, in England, they documented this. Thousands of children were killed by nuns. And you're afraid? You're still going to let these people tell you what to believe? Why are they murdering children? Why were the nuns getting pregnant and they're bearing the unborn fetuses? Because they were all having sex. Why? Why are we told today from the research that over 80% of the Roman Catholic clergy are gay when they're supposed to be celibate priests? And why don't we question that? We say today, yeah, that's fine, they're gay. No, they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be celibate priests according to their own doctrine. They're not supposed to be having sex at all. They can't do it, is the truth. They can't do what is inhumane. So why is it so hard to believe that Jesus had a wife and had children? Tell me. Why is that so hard to believe? Oh my God, if you believe that, you're going to go to hell. So, and yet those same people with the same mentality they have, they're not changing. They're not going to change. They're going to do the same thing to your kids. And now it's spreading. The abuse is spreading into our school systems. It's spreading everywhere because once it starts, it's like a fire. You can't put it out. It's an enormous problem. But anyway, try reading Matthew 4 yourself and read Psalm 91 because that's the devil is quoting Psalm 91. Ask yourself the question, why is Jesus so weak that he can't get out of the grip of this being who dragged him to the top of the temple, put him on the top of the temple and the top of the mountain? Or is he just going for the ride because he knows this being can't touch him? Anyway, have a great night, everybody. And thanks for listening. Appreciate all your thoughts. I don't know the answer, but I can only speculate. But it's an incredible piece of literature that has survived thousands of years. There's my Astoria.